Spoilers! Yo, what's good? So, in the last video, I covered all of the Jujutsu Kaisen anime right now, and overall, I thought it was pretty good. A flawed but decent first season, and a great second season that brilliantly built off the first. But now that I've finished the ending, I still feel this way. It's weird that my opinion on the Jujutsu Kaisen anime hasn't remotely changed since I originally saw it, but I think it's because I've always known deep down that this is a shit story. However, it played into its strengths so well that I didn't really mind. But what do I mean by this? Well, let's go over the main issues. Rushed and poor character writing and development. Not only does this hurt many of the character deaths, but generally there isn't a deep connection to any of the MCs, leaving the story feeling quite empty. Awful pacing. The show will be fast and action-packed and then slow down to a grinding halt for development. I get it's important, evident by my last point, but the way the story handles it is very jarring, and the dialogue overall is pretty bad. Lack of filler. Despite this being so inspired by Naruto, there's a surprising lack of anything that isn't pure plot or mindless fighting in this story. I'll give it a bit of leeway given the anime landscape right now, but it definitely makes the story in many regards feel like it's going too fast, and I wish stuff like the baseball episode were more present in this story. Plus, it's not funny, the movie's shit, Yuta's a part of the story, there's a lot of issues. But I would say that the first two seasons at least did a decent job at making me forget about them. The Culling Game arc didn't even try. What a bad arc this was. I mean, I guess if you look at it from a fighting perspective, it's decent, not as interesting as any of the material in Shibuya, but I guess it was somewhat entertaining, offering a more technical perspective on sorcery fighting. But much of my issues with this arc is just how disappointing it was. The reason why Shibuya was so fresh was because it was an effective dark tone shift in the series, so I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe the literal next arc would continue this. But they don't at all, despite the tonal continuity literally being handed to Gege. The concept of this arc is when you kill another sorcerer, you gain points, and if you don't kill another person for a certain amount of time, you die. This could have been a great follow-up to Shibuya, given the struggle arc of Yuji and the darker tone. I thought this concept could lead to a very interesting moral predicament. For example, forcing Itadori to kill another person and making him reevaluate his morals. But nah, that'd be too interesting. Instead, the main characters almost immediately gain the ability to transfer points and completely nullify the rules I talked about, ruining the tension of this arc and turning it into a mediocre battle royale. Why build this up as a dark, gruesome story only to completely give up on it immediately after? Maybe the anime could fix this, however, given how they treat something like JJK Zero, I really have no hopes for the concept of Culling Games to get a decent adaptation. Added onto this were some really bad decisions like killing Yuki Tsukumo for no reason. She literally hasn't done anything in the story, or basically writing up for Shiguro despite there being so much potential in this character. And it was clear that the story has lost its edge completely and everything past would be a husk of its former glory. But my gosh, I did not expect it to be this bad. The Shinjuku Showdown is a colossal failure on every front. Pretty quickly, we can see that every issue I've discussed before is still present and worse. The pacing in particular is still ass, with Gojo being unsealed. He gets free, challenges Sukuna to their little fight, and they agree to a month in advance. That sounds like a great way to see Gojo interact with the rest of the cast, since at this point he's been sealed longer than he's actually been out. I know it sounds crazy. I don't know how that happened, but anyways, this is the tiniest amount of characters interacting happen? No. I don't know why this guy hates characters sitting down and talking about anything but the plot so much, but a month is turned into one chapter. I'm serious, a single chapter. And basically all of it is just talking about what's gonna happen next. This may seem like a nitpick, but considering there's literally been no downtime since like what? The beginning of Shibuya with the fat girl subplot? The lack of any sort of filler is really starting to hurt. I'd like to mention also that this month looking back is just a poor way to add all these shitty plans into the fight later without them being contrived. Considering all Gege has to do is to show a flashback to where two characters talk about it. But this is still very contrived considering there's literally zero hints of any of these plans, showing how none of this messy final fight was actually planned out, but I'm getting ahead of myself. However, I'll concede a bit, considering once we get to the actual Sukuna vs Gojo fight, it's pretty alright. Obviously it isn't perfect, hell it's not even great, half this fight is just main characters off to the side explaining shit, which like, what is the point of this? The fight isn't even that complicated. Feels like it's here to drag out this conflict more than anything, but the actual fight is very solid. I like that they both abused their best abilities as much as they can, you know, like Infinite Void for Gojo and Malevolent Shrine for Sukuna, really selling how strong they are. It's fun to see how all the different components of this universe's fighting style converge into this encounter. This fun is short-lived, however, with the death of Gojo. Not that I have an issue with him dying, I think it's a pretty natural way to progress the story, but the way they go about it is absolutely awful. Not only creating a completely new heavenly restriction just so that Sukuna can get the jump on him, not only because they just killed the most popular character with a completely new rule that's never been used before, but also that final scene. When was Gojo so humble towards his opponents, even saying that he would lose against him without Megumi's powers? Did the story forget who this is? Anyway, so besides that, you may be wondering how this arc is bad if I just said that a decent portion of it is good. But trust me, as we go further in the Shinjuku Showdown arc, you'll forget that this fight even happened. So yeah, it's straight into fighting, and it sucks already. The lightning guy comes in and gets his ass kicked. I mean, alright. We also get to see a bit of Urame fighting, only for this fight to be completely off screen and a way for this character to be ran out of the plot. Alright, I mean, they were only built up since season 1, it's no big deal. Speaking of which, what happened to our other main villain? Kenjaku. He seems pretty aware of what the hero's plans are, that they're just gonna gang up on all the curses after the Sukuna and Gojo fight. So I was curious as to what he would do in this story. Well, he gets pretty strange treatment, ends up in the fight, and the guy's domain forces him into being into this like stand-up show just between them. It's a weird detour, but I thought it was charming. I'll be a little... Hey wait, run that by me again? Okay, so Kenjaku, a villain who has been built up since the first season, was just killed by Yuta in one slash. Alright, you know what? What if this is just so Gege can focus only on Sukuna to make that fight great? It's probably why Urame is also ran out of this plot. So Sukuna fight is gonna... I'm just gonna stop with giving this the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, this fight is fucking awful. If you remember, I talked about a weird lightning guy that challenged Sukuna for some reason. Now, at the time, I thought that this was just meaningless filler, especially since the fight itself was rather uninteresting. But it actually serves as a stark warning, because if you keep reading, you'll notice that this guy challenges Sukuna, this guy fights Sukuna, these guys fight Sukuna, these ones as well, these guys too. They just keep finding new characters to fight Sukuna. And this is where my biggest issue with this fight comes in, the lack of focus. Why the fuck does everyone get to fight Sukuna? I'm not even trying to be funny, there's this guy who fights Sukuna who before this point, I only knew because he fought Gojo and lost, like badly, he didn't get a single hit. As well as in JJK 0. This dude wasn't even in the main series before this point, yet he gets just as much screen time as anyone else aside from Yuta and Yuji. Feels less like a single fight and more of 20 different conflicts all fighting for a spotlight. Also, the series doesn't even attempt to hide how repetitive it is. I can feel every cycle because they all play out the same. Character challenges Sukuna, does something unique that catches him off guard. A flashback commences that either A, it shows a scene where a character talks about this guy and reveals that in some way they may be stronger than Gojo, or B, it reveals that, oh wow, this is part of their amazing plan all along. Then the character fights Sukuna, they slightly chip away at him, and then their ass gets kicked. Every fucking time, it just keeps happening. You know, instead of this garbage, why couldn't there have just been a few main characters against Sukuna like Maki, Yuta, and Yuji? Because this formula not only is tedious, but actively ruins some of the better scenes, such as Yuta and Yuji's fight in that domain. The sheer lack of tension and interest in this conflict completely ruins these scenes. It's funny because you expect the opposite, that the shittiness of everything else will make these moments shine, but at this point my brain is so fried by this fight that I can't enjoy anything this arc offers. Okay, so yeah, that fucking sucked. But this last fight isn't the end of my rants with the series. Now, like I said earlier, JJK has extremely rushed and poor character writing. However, I won't deny that I enjoy many of them. Obviously, I like Gojo, Todo, Nanami, Toji, and Sukuna, characters who are instantly likable, but I appreciate the arcs the two main characters got, Megumi and Yuji, even if they were simple. However, all of these aspects go to shit, as characters and their developments really go nowhere and serve no greater point in this story. I thought Maki was going to be really important considering her new Toji-esque rebrand, but aside from killing all of the Zenin clan, her character amounts to slightly chipping away at Sukuna and then getting her ass kicked. Higuruma, a pretty cool character, wonder what they'll do. Oh, he gets his ass kicked by Sukuna. Yuta, never liked him, but maybe if he had a decent conclusion. Oh, never mind, he gets his ass kicked by Sukuna. You see an issue? Either characters don't have a conclusive ending at all like almost everyone from Tokyo, or their only purpose to the story is just to chip away at Sukuna. The only person who comes out on top is Sukuna, who gets a solid ending, but I'm wondering why this treatment wasn't given to any other character, instead given to a character archetype that doesn't even need it. This is a never issue with the final fight, considering this problem could have been avoided if each individual character had something unique to deal with, instead of everyone going for Sukuna. You know, like in the Shibuya incident before, but whatever, let's move on to the even worse side, Megumi and Yuji. Now, again, I enjoyed both, especially Yuji's arc in particular, which was compelling. Seeing him overcome his unbearable amount of grief in Shibuya was amazing. So what happened to these two? Well, like I mentioned previously with Megumi, he's pretty much wasted by this story, considering from the end of Culling Games onwards, he's basically just a vessel for Sukuna. And I personally think this is a really stupid way to progress his character. Much of Fushigero's character arc before was that he wasn't applying himself, and I thought as the story progressed, they would further build off his mental struggles. And they did, but in a completely different way. Instead of making him endure struggles with mindset, they make him endure struggles with depression and loss, effectively making him another Yuji. The issue with this is it doesn't build off anything the character was before. Sure, he would constantly attempt to summon Mahoruga in conflicts which would kill him, however this wasn't because he was suicidal, it's because he lacked confidence in his fighting abilities and wanted to at least take out the enemy before he died. So to suddenly make this character about grief and mental health rather than applying himself is a baffling decision, especially with how little it's actually developed and also considering how quickly he escapes this mindset of not wanting to live, leaving me with little to no sympathy for the character by the end, unlike how I felt for Yuji. Aw shit, that leads me to Yuji. What a fuck up on all accounts. My guy went from one of my favorites to easily the most potential wasted, but why? Well, let's go back to the Shibuya incident. I praised the struggle arc of Yuji because I thought it was a great way to mature the character, especially since this idea was present since his first encounter with Mahito. However, after this, they don't do anything with his character. From the beginning of Culling Game to the end, he's effectively just in the plot to punch people and that's it. And from this point onward, I realized that this dude's character development was over. His role as the struggler was transferred over to Megumi, and his purpose in the story didn't even make sense anymore. He's a fucking main character, yeah, he's only in like a quarter of Culling Game, and oh my gosh did they only worsen my boy from then on. Gege, realizing how useless this guy would be in combat against Sukuna, decided to give him every power up in the book. Alright, he can do reverse curse techniques, he can fucking make domains now. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that he could do Hollow Purple at this point. This only serves to further how little impact he even had on the plot anymore, considering after all of this, he's still useless in the fight against Sukuna without assistance. And only after his bullshit and Sukuna being hit by every attack ever made does Gege finally remember that this guy is in fact the MC, and should probably have a one-on-one confrontation with the main villain. I would harp on this because this shows how little the story is planned out, but I think you get the point. This leads us to the ending domain with Sukuna, which I feel is a decent idea but poorly executed. The intention is to show that Yuji's kindness is unflinching even after the events of JJK, however this is deeply flawed. Firstly, why is Yuji being forgiving to Sukuna? I get that Sukuna is human and Yuji wants to forgive all humans, however considering his mercilessness towards Mahito, I'd expect him to be at least more hesitant, especially since this idea of Yuji's forgiveness is so underdeveloped and poor. The worst person he's forgiven up to this point, Higuruma, killed two others who, in his mind, were perpetrating the corrupt legal system in Japan, which while immoral, at least has a reason. Meanwhile, Sukuna literally wiped out much of the Shibuya district with no remorse. So what the hell, why are you going on about killing any version of Mahito, meanwhile Sukuna you'll gladly sit down and fish with before deciding to forgive him? Is him being human that important that this treatment is so drastically different? Feels like a full arc of Yuji's morals is just missing because at least from what I remember, no substantial change happened between these two events. But the more important point against this ending is that Yuji's suffering is severely undermined by the events of Shinjuku, considering Kugisaki, Megumi, and Todo all come back unharmed. This not only is to the detriment of the entire point of Yuji's character, being that he endures pain but still continues on anyways, but hurts the meaning of JJK overall, considering much of Yuji's grief is completely undone for the purpose of having a happy ending. So what the hell was the point? What was even the point of this character if so much of his struggle he's endured wasn't even real? And this is when I realized that this manga is the stupidest shit ever. So in conclusion, this ending did not do a single thing right, so I'm gonna delete my chant. Stop talking and leave the Shinjuku Showdown arc with a score of 2 out of 10. I'll also update my rating of Jujutsu Kaisen from a 7 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10. I hope the anime's better. Yo, you've reached the end of the video. Sorry for the long delay. I've had a lot of schoolwork lately. So yeah, what do you think of the Shinjuku Showdown? Do you think it's overhated? Do you think it's underhated? Let me know in the comments. And yeah, goodbye.